My name is Monica Snowbird. I'm Anishinaabe. I'm originally from Detroit, but I've been out here in the Springs since like 94-ish. I'm the program director for the HASIA Advocate Program. We provide Native-specific advocacy for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking here in El Paso County. I'm also on the Health and Wellness Committee for the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs. I am one of the cultural curriculum parent liaisons for the Title VI Indian Education Program with the 11. I'm on the board for a couple places. I do a lot of stuff. So we also just recently founded the Pikes Peak Indigenous Women's Alliance. So when you're talking about Native history, I think what I love so much right now, what's happening is that we are now writing our own history and correcting the revisionist history that has been written on our behalf, especially here in Colorado Springs. We just got Indigenous Peoples Day passed last month. Now we are working with City Council. We're going to hopefully draft a land acknowledgement that's appropriate for this specific region. It's to basically acknowledge whose land we are all currently occupying. I feel like there's a step beyond that, I mean, yes, we all know that Ute, Cheyenne, Lakota, Kiowa, many Pueblos, there's 48 different tribes that have legal ties to the state of Colorado. I don't think just acknowledging whose land we're standing on is enough. I think that you really need to look at what took place in order for you to be here versus the people whose original land this is, and to really be aware of what took place locally and to really have to have those hard conversations about that history. A lot of people don't want to talk about the ugly things. If you were to look up, because I've been doing it for the last couple of weeks, if you were to look up the Indigenous history of this region, it's really hard to find anything that goes back very far. And some of the things that we have found have been extremely problematic. And those things have been taking place up until current history. So, but again, if you're going to acknowledge whose land we're on, if you're not going to be an active participant in righting some of those wrongs and being involved to support Indigenous issues, it really doesn't matter that you're acknowledging our land, whose land this is. I'm a guest on this land, even though I'm an Indigenous person. My people are from the Great Lakes, and so we have no legal ties to Colorado, so I'm a guest here just like everybody else is.
I am not Native American, and I have just simply been one of the historians doing local history, state history, regional history for so long that I have tried to locate and extract from every source that I could to help correct the problem. The problem continues. The problem is multifaceted. The problem includes obtaining sources that are Native American generated, obtaining sources that are at the very least more objective, discussing events, and in Colorado we have plenty of them in Colorado history that have usually been presented up until, say, the last 50 years maybe at the most, have usually been presented from not only a white perspective but an anti-Indian perspective, and not just a disregarding perspective but a hostile perspective. And the advantage often is not so much that we have printed sources with a Native American perspective as it is that students, if you give them the sources that are hostile, or at least sort of subliminally hostile to Native American, or just continue and perpetuate the old ways of telling the history, if you give that to modern students, they can read through it. So part of the metamorphosis of people's views is to have students read primary accounts, because with students, Native American or not, what I find works best so far is to try to have them work with the primary accounts whether they're Native American or white accounts, and analyze those for themselves and see all the holes in the white account, see the hostility, see the guilt of people who are perpetrating inhumane acts. As they study that, the students get that far at least. And then, unfortunately, there are few, but there are films and stories and accounts written by Native Americans that help in a class like American Indian History, but that aren't necessarily that common in the Colorado region. So it's difficult still, always.
Making assumptions off of appearance. I have a cousin who's got pale blonde hair and light skin and light eyes, and her and I both have dealt with the same thing. And some of my relatives that look more native, that have the olive tone skin and the darker hair and the darker eyes, even they have had issues with having that, not really mistaken identity, but like people questioning whether or not you're being truthful and that this is actually your heritage. Are you sure you're not Hispanic? I'm pretty sure I would know if I'm Hispanic. You know, are you sure you have Native blood in you? Yes, I'm pretty sure. Like, I know these things better than you do. Just saying. But yeah, it's a continuous thing because there, I mean, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm pretty sure there are no pure-blooded Native Americans left. Like, there's been so much integration with the rest of the cultures that have joined our country.
I think if you look in, we'll just talk specifically to Colorado Springs, just so I don't take over this whole panel. I think if you look at it, there's a monolithic pan-Indian stereotype that we all believe the same way, that we all have the same language, that we all have the same beliefs. But then also, if you really look at fundamentally how Colorado Springs has historically viewed Native people, it's a fantasy version. Colorado Springs has literally had fraudulent things going over and over and over. Like, we have the fake cliff dwellings. We had performers that were hired to work in Garden of the Gods up through the late 50s that were not Native, and they literally just made their own Halloween type costumes and performed. We used, in the early part of the 19th or in early 1900s, they brought up a man from the San Clara Pueblo, dressed him in Plains Indian clothing because that's what the only accepted version of what the Native look would be, and called him Chief Manitou. Manitou is an Ojibwe word from my language that means spirit. It's just pronounced wrong. It's Manitou. So there was never a Chief Manitou. We have the retired sheriff who runs around and tells everybody that prayer trees were culturally modified by the Ute people, even though the Ute have been adamant that this never took place, yet somehow his version of history is more valid and more defended, like adamantly defended, than the Ute people themselves. And so we used to have a group called the Patuska Dancers, or Matuska Dancers. Patuska's a town in Oklahoma, sorry. Who were, again, a Boy Scout troop that used to perform all the time, all over the city, as Natives. And so it's like, Colorado Springs is always like, oh, we love Natives here. It's like, no, you love the fantasy version of it that you created. When you were actually faced with Indigenous people telling you, no, this is not okay. When we have an elementary school that was named after Irving Hubert, I don't know how to pronounce it. He was one of the participants of the Sand Creek Massacre. The West Side was Old Colorado City was founded by Bott, who was, again, participant in the Sand Creek Massacre. Templeton Gap, participant in the Sand Creek Massacre. Incident after incident, and it's never ending. And our community doesn't embrace that. And even when you look at organizations that serve Native people, everyone in Colorado Springs tends to go to a non-native led organization. And when you say, hello, there's like all these native led nonprofits who are staffed and run by native people. Oh, well, no, we want to work with them anyway. And so the Springs is really challenging. And I feel like there's a lot, we've had some gains recently, but I still think that we have a lot to do. And if you want Native history, you talk to Native people. We don't ever need anyone who's non-Native to interpret our history, remind us of who we are as a people. We know that. Our oral history is proven time and time again to be just as valid as everything else, except we're never taken seriously until it's also substantiated by Western science.
So I'm an enrolled citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation out of Okmulgee, Oklahoma. I've been to Okmulgee. I have ancestors that were born there. My great grandmother raised me from when I was a child, and she's from Okmulgee. I'm what you call in the community, I'm an AFNet. That means African Native. That's what we're referred to as AFNets. My ancestry started because I had relatives that were slaves of the Creek Nation. The 5 civilized tribes, this is not taught in school, they had black slaves. And during the Treaty of 1866, they were ordered to free their slaves, and each slave became a citizen, a full-fledged citizen of each tribe. That's why you have it's known as Cherokee freedmen, Choctaw freedmen, Chickasaw freedmen, Creek freedmen, and Seminole freedmen. Okay. However, in the question about quantum, yes, I do have a card, and my card states that I have Creek in blood. So we're not just necessarily people who have no quantum that are tribal members with a card. Okay. What needs to be brought to everyone's attention, in 1979, the 5 civilized tribes, I'm referring to the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole, and the Cherokee. Each of those 5 tribes decitizenized all their black freedmen. So what happened was the Cherokee Nation, however, last year, with the help of a wonderful lady named Marilyn Vann, she's a Cherokee citizen, the Cherokee Nation re-citizenized all their freedmen last year. The Cherokee Nation is the only one of the 5 civilized tribes that let their black citizens in. I'm very familiar with my culture. There's a lot of us, just because we're black Indians, you'd be surprised how many of us do powwow. We know our language, we know our culture, we respect it, we love it.
Oh, I'm just tired of it. So we've been fighting these things for so long. Like, we're working on the mascot thing at D12 right now, because they honor us so hard with that racist floating head, So, I'm constantly like, well, you're not gonna convince anyone to think your way. I'm like, I don't care if they agree with me or not. My motive is to make sure they realize that we're not going anywhere. Like, we're going to continue to challenge your myths, your inaccuracies, your stereotypes, and eventually, like, we win. So, I mean, it just takes us a long time, but we are winning. We got rid of the racist mascot for Washington. We just got Indigenous Peoples Day. Statues are coming down. Columbus is coming down all over the country. So, we're not necessarily winning it across the board. I mean, we have a lot of Native women in Congress right now. So we have the Savannahs Act just got passed. So we have legislation passing. So it's all these little bites that we're taking out of all of this. And eventually, with all those little changes that we're doing, it's going to add up to be significant changes.
I am very happy that these things are at least becoming more prevalent in mainstream, because without the wool being pulled back, people are just going to continue to accept the myths that they've been taught throughout history, and nothing will change. because they're comfortable in that explanation. It's a sugarcoating and it's complacency because it doesn't affect them. Also, again, to Monica's point, is being active. It's being active and finding more things that can help with the injustices. The missing Indigenous women that like those numbers have been jumping and continuously rising.
So Greg Dale is a local artist. He lives out in Falcon. He's a Pyramid Lake Paiute. The picture is his daughter, Sage. I think she's almost 14 now. So the red handprint is the symbol of missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit. A lot of cultures, Indigenous cultures, think of red as one of the only colors that spirits can see. And so the representation of the handprint is the silencing of that sister's voice. And so we use the color red because we're hoping that it can bring their spirits back to us so we can find those people who are missing.